Let me see. So yeah, I can share a little. I'll just try to be brief. I mean, the um for those, if I haven't mentioned it, I did. So um that observatory can be translated into governance basically through these. What I found was these are basically the three mechanisms that could be used for based on existing legal devices to stand up or prop up the life observatory and then have representation within governance process. So you have a guardian model, which is basically like, like parent-child relationship, or somebody who can't fully represent themselves in within a legal institution could have a guardian to represent their interests. Um, so by not having an express voice, like the squirrels or the flowers can't communicate or transact within a legal institution, they can have guardians. And that's, I would say, the predominant model for a lot of rights of nature, personhood kind of precedents that are being set are are being implemented through a guardian model where you just have qualified representatives to speak on behalf of non-human entities in within deliberation or parliamentary or governance processes. And then the ombudsman model is more like an auditor or mediator role. So you have third parties come in and audit policies, but their commitment is to a broader framework of the rights of non-human entities and conservation or preservation or sustainability commitments. So you have a certain kind of qualified ombudsman come in to audit, and then you give them certain powers either to mediate or to trigger certain governance processes. And then, of course, there's courts, which is just process. And by courts, I'm saying very broadly, you can set up like citizen jury processes um, to essentially make decisions about good or bad policy, and arbitration or um, reconciliation of harms. Um, so at the ecovillage, I basically translated this into this kind of decision tree process, which eventually leads to resolutions over policies that are created that are maybe not in the best interest of the broader network of the broader biotic community that the ecovillage was taking responsibility for. So there were basically two pathways into a policy injunction. Um, one could come from the one could come from the observatory. So think of it as like, like a NASA observatory. Usually an observatory just observes, but in this case, we wanted to give the observatory, which would be an actual like person and department within the eco village that's overseeing basic observatory functions of the eco village, but give them the power to submit an injunction to the board or to a governance committee. So not only are they observing, but if they see harm or they see negative consequences, they can produce an injunction, or guardian on the board that is a persistent member of the board can produce an injunction. So you have two directions. One is sort of from the bottom up from the observatory. One is from the top down of a guardian representative on the board. Both of those trigger an audit by a third party. So this is sort of like a checks and balances principle, to where even if you manage to create these injunctive systems that can constrain policy over a biotic community, if you don't have an appropriate separation of auditing the pot, like in terms of the interests of the auditor, then you can see how this could get gamed pretty easily. So we tried to set it up to where there would be a qualified third party auditor who would respond to the injunction, and then they would have discretion over whether they move, if basically if they can resolve the issues directly with the board, and that's one potential outcome of the audit. And if not, then it goes to a citizens jury, and the citizens jury is a due diligence process that would resolve any policy injunctions. And the citizens jury was basically just made up of the network. So the ecovillage I was working with was Tierra Moore. And so basically we did like a stakeholder mapping, called it an influence network. So that included estate owners, equity owners, renters. So they're catering to like digital nomads. They had a research institution, they had investors and biotic communities represented by guardians. And then the Tierra Moore proper is like the workers and employees. You could include a periphery network within that influence network if you wanted, but pretty much just kept it constrained to this. And so these stakeholders would basically be from these stakeholders, you'd randomly select from each influence group a representative for the citizens jury. And that citizens jury ultimately resolve would be appointed a facilitator by the ombudsman auditor in order to deliberate over the injunction and resolve policy. So you see this gets pretty complicated pretty quick. But all of these are like stops and flows for trying to not just
Derek, just one thing real quick, sorry to interrupt. We're just seeing the failures mode page. Were you sharing anything else on?
Oh yeah, the whole time I was trying to share.
Yeah.
That's not.
That's what.
Okay.
We were seeing the failure mode page.
Yeah, I had all this.
Okay,
this was
there you go. Okay.
Yeah, this was me talking about Scott and the scientific management versus the city. This was me talking about the three legal mechanisms. This was the injunction process. So you see there's a decision tree from the observatory, from the guardian on the board, the ombudsman. If they can't get a resolution, then they go to a citizens jury. This is this influence network. This was the peripheral network I mentioned that you could use, but maybe not. And this is the citizen jury like selection, just to visualize how each representative group is randomly getting a randomly selected citizen to participate in the assembled citizens jury, which would have an appointed facilitator by the ombudsman. And yeah, this is just that again. So sorry, I didn't realize I wasn't sharing. So yeah, you see like when you're just purely when you just look at it as trying to create more than human representations, but using kind of traditional human management practices, the process can get a little bit labor intensive quickly. And to me, this is like the biggest barrier to replicating and scaling. Not to mention that like the legal institutions, their capacities or functional capacity from jurisdiction to jurisdiction is going to vary a lot. So the viability of just purely relying on the rights of nature movement, like expanding through traditional legal devices, to me is like, I kind of look at this experience with TR Moore, and I look at rights of nature movement as right now, like setting precedents through these kind of clunky bureaucratic processes, but that's a really, really important step is precedent setting. Like, and the precedent is that more than human configurations of agents should have legal representation. They should have personhood. And which would endow them with rights and responsibilities, which the reason I think that's so important is because, I mean, the last time that happened, we had the Renaissance, like but it was just focused on humans. And now we're talking about it in terms of these superordinate intelligences or agencies. But one of the most successful versions of that obviously has been corporate personhood, corporations. But I don't see any reason why we can't expand the corpus to start thinking of these ecosystems or combinations of AI, humans, and natural agents in these dedicated bodies, social bodies that have rights and responsibilities. And those precedents need to be set, but at some point for it to actually scale and to replicate, where we need technology, which obviously we're exploring through these interfaces, symbiosis, and so it's exciting. I think that Ingvild mentioned like it's not like the Zoop model or these models which just kind of rely on purely traditional human management representative practices. They're not bold enough, and in a way I think that's right, but in a way I think like those practices are setting up these explorations that are building new interfaces, and the exploration of these new interfaces, they have to build on these inheritances of these legal protections in the way that rights and responsibilities have been instantiated for the last few centuries. And I do think that there's I'm excited about exploring the pathway of demonstrating personhood, but through these new interfaces. So demonstrating the capacity to, in the same way that a corporation can enter into contracts like a legal person, I don't see any reason why a configuration of bees and humans and AI models can't essentially do the same thing and advocate for their rights. And I think that there's a big potential to frame these small kind of weird artistic projects in that light and try to push the needle forward. And that I haven't seen enough. I think sometimes people want to stray away from that kind of like, oh, let's depend on the rule of law to try to like make change happen. But by my estimation, when you make breakthroughs in legal innovations, it's a really, really big deal. Most legal change is extremely slow, but you have these punctuated moments which radically change how entities within a society are protected to pursue their rights and to uphold their responsibilities. So I think I actually think it's a super exciting area. And yeah, I guess I'm summarizing why I had that one project. It was, I see the bureaucratic overload, then I see, and seeing what is happening within this community, how much potential there is to kind of bring those worlds together. So yeah, and have explored that a little bit with Travis Crippling, who's Danilo, just in terms of
Natalia too.
we wanted to create, we started working on this project, we kind of put it into the icebox, but we wanted to create a way for like bees to apply for research grants using an LLM model, but as a way to demonstrate the ability of non-human agents when they're hooked up with certain devices to enter into a contract, and then and just to get one cycle of that, even if it's a small cycle. I think there's like low hanging fruit with like those kind of projects, where you can get a semi-autonomous configuration that can't necessarily apply for corporate, legal identity, but could enter into a contract, and then you have these use cases which start to build up these new kind of legal precedents for this need to have a way to represent these identities of these like ecosystems of intelligence. So
That's brilliant, Derek. It sounds fantastic and very much of interest. I've got to run right now, but I obviously want to continue the conversation on it.
Yeah, brilliant is the word. Congratulations, Derek.
Yeah, just quick curiosity about the active inference kind of connection. How did that kind of come up? Because I didn't expect it immediately from that.
where did it come up for me?
Yeah, just how did you interface or intersect with the whole group there?
How did I don't know. I'm just constantly researching.
Okay.
So I don't even remember how I found that particular paper, but I do keep a pulse on some of these researchers who are kind of in this weird space of synthetic biology, and distributed cognition, because they, I think they're like right at this similar intersection that playing with these interfaces, it's symbiosis. So I tend to just keep track of them. And
right on. Good stuff. Yeah, I participated there and continue to participate a little bit at the Active Inference Institute, and it came up
cool.
earlier conversations with Danilo and Akash in some of the application of that to their work on the SymBioWare. So yeah, super interesting and really kind of excited to hear that intersection come up in your introduction, or you're lobbing some content in. So I'll have to talk more about that. Yeah, because I feel the same way. I feel that that group and Daniel and the gang, they've really they've got their pencil right at the kind of tip of possibilities or new possibilities kind of thing that they're carving really new creative territory for. So really excited about that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I do have to sign off, so apologies, I have to rush away, but really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't realize that you guys were just looking at the failure modes.
Nah, no worries.
Rushed, actually.
Yeah, that's really nice, Derek. Thanks for sharing all of that. It got me thinking about a lot of things, especially the mechanics of it, where you bring in the observatory and sort of like speaker for the. I'm using the term speaker for the living because that's the term that the ZOA people use. And then those two things together with a third party auditioning, that seems like a well thought framework. Because I'm very much in doubt as well with like the application of like the rights of nature, so on and so forth. And I guess you've just opened up a little, well, a big window for my thinking around that. So, and on that note, sort of like my immediate thought is that within Symbiosis. I don't know if you've come across this idea of the symbiote totem. It was what we wrote for the last Zuzal around. And I think that could serve, or some of the intentions behind it were very much for it to be maybe what you're describing as this observatory. So a kind of like hub that is attuned to the more than human world or worlds in a locality, and that serves as an interface for the humans to then both perceive and interact with that. And a next step would be, like a natural next step for that would be the integration of decision making in that process. So yeah, I don't know, it just feels like lots of synergies. And the fact that you are also interested in the emerging interfaces in this context is also reassuring to me, because that's also something I've been exploring a lot in terms of AI, so on and so forth, and how that can be used for the demonstrations, as you're saying. I see our moment as in like the moment we're here right now producing things. If we think of a grand scale kind of scheme, I think we definitely are at this phase shift, and in such a turbulent moment, sparks of light seem very valuable, or seeds of new horizons. I can't really avoid the metaphors, but the demonstrations, like if we have something that brings the idea home that people can interact with, that they have a hang of what it could be like, and even better if that closes the loop in the sense of the biotic community generating stimuli, which is then part of a kind of decision-making process, which then feeds back into the biotic community, which then triggers something that maybe the biotic community can become aware of the process itself. Why would that be impossible? I don't think that's impossible. It's just that in my work in different time scales, in my work in different ways, in unexpected ways, maybe it's not as linear as I've described, but why is it that a forest can't be aware that there's people caring for it in a certain manner, and then it will behave in a other manner, conscious of that caring, right? Yeah, that's what we're talking about here. That's exactly what the core of all of this. So really great stuff. Thanks for bringing that up. And yeah, from here onwards, I wonder how we could materialize some of these things in the spirit of demonstrating them. That's a question I leave open for all of us to consider. Thinking about all the things that we all have done together individually at different moments. Where can we converge and sort of like show it to the world? Yeah. Thanks, man. I'm very inspired by all this. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. Just in terms of like just opportunities. I mean, when I was doing this rights and nature work, I was interested, like, is anybody basically brought together the world of thinking about, should AI entities have rights, and, you know, should natural entities have rights, and if so, how? And I couldn't really find any overlap, but it seemed to me like those are the same conversation. And started thinking of it in terms of like rights of life
Mhm.
Or the other terminology, which I wish I could find better terminology, the rights of agents.
Right.
So, broader than persons, broader
Mhm.
than corporations. Agents are anybody that has goals and intent, is anything that has a identity, intention, goals, and some motives to try to pursue those intentions and goals. Very broad. You can go from microbial communities to, so now you've really blown up the space of what kinds of legal identities can be formed. And so that was just from languaging and trying to bring together the electronic personhood and electronic rights conversation with the rights of nature into like a common dialogue. That seems like a good opportunity just in terms of getting more people into the conversation, or more people
Right.
on in the same. And that was why I shared the shared intelligences, because I think researchers who are kind of trying to grapple with I sort of see like people tend to go in a couple of directions with like AI and like a chaos, like what's happening, social crisis. They'll either go to a anthropic bias, like humanism, like we just got double down on like protecting humans and make sure AI is aligned with that, or a sort of anti-anthropic, which the nature conservation like is just like, we'll just keep the humans out of it and keep AI out of it. And so that's more of a descending perspective. And then there's the transhumanist AI just want to be like, well, let's just like merge with AI, leave our bodies and shit. But I've been looking for communities that are trying to do both. So that shared intelligence community was one, or symbiosis, obviously, I think is doing that. I haven't looked enough to really know what else is out there, but I don't think there's a lot. I don't think there's a lot of communities that are having a discussion, which is why just bringing it together is good, but you don't want to just, discuss and discuss. The real value here, I think, is what you've been doing, which is demonstrations, which also catalyze the discussion and discourse. So it would be interesting to Travis and I, we set that aside, like I said, the bees, but just to find some people who are interested in coming up with some small scale experiments, maybe starting with Symbiototem, and how do you connect a kind of observatory as a way of communicating needs and intentions of non-human entities to trigger another process of seeking to fulfill those needs, maybe in a way that's even if you could somehow connect Symbiototem to another mechanism, like a wallet and an agent that can perform a transaction, and just show that loop. How's that create a small loop there? Because that's what I was talking with the observatory, and the making something legible is like a prerequisite to governance and more than human representation and governance. But it's not, it's the prerequisite. And then the next step is some kind of control mechanism that feeds back and then updates the legibility. So even something small where it's like, could the plants communicate their need for water? And then that triggers a semi-autonomous transaction. And then we can say, this is an agent that basically demonstrates personhood. But it doesn't clearly have legal representation, but it should,
Mhm.
so you could start to
Mhm.
use this.
Yeah,
So anyway, I don't know if that sparks anything for you, but
yeah, yeah. It does. It does. Even some people who might be doing similar stuff. At the same time, yeah, I should jump to this other call. Yeah. Um, so what I'm gonna do is I would ask us to end here and continue asynchronously on the Telegram. And I will share some references of things that seem like they're doing what you're saying with a couple of
Hmm.
caveats. But I'm sure we can take from there. There's a lot to be distilled in this little demonstrations for sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, but thank you very much, man. Really appreciate it and
absolutely.
happy to have you partaking in all this. It's really good. Have a good
All
week
right,
then. Yeah, we'll keep asynchronous. Thanks. Cheers.
all right. Follow up then. See you.